And after we mince our garlic, we put our chicken in the oven on 425 degrees, and while that's cooking, we'll check our potatoes. Margaret's smile felt plastered on, and she could feel her makeup running under the studio lights. She was cooking for a crowd of about 100, most of them on their phones, with probably less than 1,000 paying attention at home. She knew how fortunate she was to get this spot on Channel 12's Something Cookin' segment, but it had barely changed her situation at all. The extra money was nice, but all it really meant was that she had to go to Salome's fine dining at 2 p.m. instead of noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She'd been excited at first, hoping someone from a big network might see her, but after 2 years of the segment, it really hadn't amounted to much. "Oh yeah, just look at those potatoes," she said, holding up a bowl for the audience. "Now we'll just give them an injection from today's sponsor." She gritted her teeth as she presented the injector like a game show host presenting prizes. "Archibald Forrest's Hot Cheese Injector. With Archibald Forrest, you can be sure that your family is getting 100% American-made cheese from right here in the heartland. Archibald Forrest, a name you can trust." She slid the needle into the potatoes and injected the soft spuds with sauce. They bulged a little, the cheese oozing out as she slid the needle free. It was enough to make her skin crawl. She hated these cheese injectors, mostly because they made her think of the big needles she had looked at when she was a kid. She had a lifelong fear of needles, and this wasn't doing it any favors. She was glad when the set person took the tray away, the gleaming chrome injectors making her teeth chatter. She kept her smile in place, though, not wanting to appear rattled by a little thing like needles. Now, those potatoes can go into the oven for 20 minutes, and that should give our chicken a chance to get nice and brown. While that cooks, let's talk a little more about today's sponsor. Archibald Forrest is a cheese company you can trust. For over 50 years, they've been providing quality cheese to the... She fell into the paid segment easily, her mind not on cheese. Her mind was on one of the only two people actually listening to her. They kind of stood out amongst the sea of phones and watchers and bored faces. They wore a suit like an undertaker's, the handkerchief sticking out at the throat of the taller one, looking garish. It was all that looked garish about him, too. While the young one appeared vibrant, his dark skin nearly making him blend into the dimmed house lights. The man beside him looked like a corpse. His skin was pale, his hair fine and platinum, and his smile was too big. She was afraid that it would cut his head in half and send it falling into the seats in front of him at any minute, and their attention caused her to stutter more than once over the product placement. The timer went off behind her as she spoke, and she was glad to turn away as she went to take the potatoes out. "Look at those beauties! Bursting with flavor and ready for your table. Everyone here today will be getting a complimentary sample of Archibald Forrest's Hot Cheese Injector, a $25 gift, yours free today for watching this segment in studio." The lights for applause came on, and they put their phones down long enough to clap half-heartedly. The old corpse's hands sounded like bones coming together as he clapped for her, too. She kept smiling as the lights baked her, and when she invited the cameras to return to the studio, she sagged in the lights when they went up. She set the potatoes down a little harder than she strictly needed to, and walked off set in a flurry of apron and no-slip shoes. She had to get out of the sight of those two, the corpse especially. They had both been interested in her, but the eyes of the old guy had been downright predatory. "Great show today, Mags," JD said, coming around to catch her up. She raised an eyebrow at him, not sure why he was here. Jamie Darling was her agent, and he wasn't a very good one. He'd got her this gig and a few guest spots on other cooking shows. That was about all he had managed in her 10-year career as a semi-celebrity chef. You just don't have brand recognition, Mags. One of these days you'll get there. Till then, just put your time in, he'd always say. Please tell me you have something, she said as she headed for the dressing room. Her dressing room had started life as a broom closet, and Maggie could still smell the cleaners that had once lived here. She stopped outside, knowing they would be nose to nose if she invited him in. That was a little more intimate than she wanted to be with Jamie Darling, and they both knew it. I do, as it happens. His smile was nearly as large as the ghoul's had been, and he seemed quite happy with himself. I got you a spot in the preliminaries for the Food Network's new chef showcase. It's no Iron Chef, but it's a place for chefs to make a name for themselves, and they agreed to accept an audition tape from a one Margaret Schaefer. Maggie had to admit that was pretty good, and the hug she threw on JD was legitimate. Oh my God, JD, this is huge. This is how guys like Emerald got their start. If I could do well here, I could leverage this into a line of cookware, or a show on the Food Network, or a spot at a celebrity restaurant, or even pump the brakes, shooting star, JD said, laughing at her excitement. It's just an audition. There's some serious competition here, but I think you got a good shot. These are mostly no-name chefs, guys who are cooking short-order stuff or catering kids' parties. You helped Salome earn that Michelin star that she's so proud of showing off, and I know you can wow the judges here, too. Maggie smiled. Thanks, JD. When's the tape due? He sucked air through his teeth. That's the bad news. It's got to be in by Sunday to qualify. Maggie's anger flashed up like a grease fire. Sunday? That's only 3 days. I don't know what I'm going to cook. I don't have any ingredients. I don't. JD put a hand on her shoulder. Don't sweat the I don'ts. You figure out what you need, and I'll get the supplies. You can pay me back when you're a big star, right? He said with a wink. She nodded. Okay, I'll figure it out tonight and send you a list. We can do this. I know we can. She reached into the dressing room and grabbed the hanger for her apron, taking off her cook's whites too, and trading them for the grease-stained ones she wore at Salome's. Now, however, I need to get to work. Till I'm famous, I've still got bills to pay. I need 2 steaks for table 2, potatoes au gratin, and asparagus. Yes, chef. Maggie directed the kitchen as her brain ran in overdrive. House salad and Catalina for table 7. Oysters and clams. Table 6 is going out now. Something with pork or beef, she thought, as she chopped vegetables and prepared broths. I need a lamb and rice for table 9 and a porterhouse medium for table 9. Broccoli spears and mashed potatoes. Yes, chef. She had decided on pork as she went into the middle of the dinner rush and was constructing her ingredients when she saw the two enter the restaurant. She was standing in the door of the kitchen, watching the food go out as she caught her breath before going to prep the beef for the next rush. She saw them walk in and take a table near the wall, finding menus and bending over them studiously. Even bent over that plastic rectangle, she could still feel him looking at her. He was peeking, side-eyed from across the glossy surface of today's specials, and she shuddered as she ducked back into the kitchen. A few minutes later, Gabriella came back in with their order. Be careful with these, she said, her voice low and a little afraid. I think that guy at table 16 might be a food critic. He makes jokes and smiles a lot, but he just has an aura about him. I don't like it. They want 2 porterhouses, potatoes au gratin, and broccoli. How do they want their steaks? Maggie asked, patting Dave as she took his place on the grill. If this was a critic, she wanted to get out in front of this, so he'd have the best food and the most expertise possible. The younger guy wants his medium, but the other guy, he wants his steak rare. Maggie shuddered, but here at Salome's, the customer was always right, and it was hard to mess up a rare steak. 20 minutes later, Maggie took the plates out herself, telling Gabrielle that she would take them to the table. To her surprise, Gabrielle seemed relieved. Thank God. Every time I go to refill their drinks, that guy's eyes creep me out. His smile looks unnatural. She closed her eyes as if trying to find the right words, and she finally settled on that one. Maggie took the plates out to the pair, and when she sat them down on the polished wooden surface, the man with the strange eyes looked up at her expectantly. "I don't like being hounded, gentlemen. I assume that's why you followed me here. So why don't you tell me what this is all about?" The skeletal man looked at her, his smile growing wide as he turned back to the dark youth. "My name is Richard T. Sereph, and this is Lucifer Jones, my assistant. Pay no attention to him, however. He's learning the trade and is mostly here to observe. The reason I've come here today is to talk about selling your talent." Maggie looked at him oddly. My talent?" Mr. Sereph indicated an empty chair at the table, and Maggie took it, keeping a safe distance from the pair. They were like bookends, a pair of undertakers out on the town, and had he just said that boy's name was Lucifer? Who would saddle someone with a name like that? Clearly not this one. He was wide enough to be the father of Snow. They did make an interesting contrast, however, and Maggie was interested to know why they were following her. "Yes, your talent," he said, taking a business card out of his coat. "Libris Talent is looking for all kinds of talent these days, and yours would be a fine addition to our growing catalog." This wasn't quite what she had expected. She had expected a fan. God knew she had enough letters in the studio, but this sounded more like another agent's attempt to scalp her for their agency. She had heard of things like that happening, but she thought it was something that only happened in movies. Surely they weren't here for her, but what if this was her big shot? "Okay, so what exactly are you guys? Are you talent agents or something?" "You could say that," Mr. Sereph said. "Our business is talent. We pay people for the talent they may not be utilizing to its fullest extent." "People like me?" she asked, bristling a little at the comment. "You think I'm wasting my talent? Is that what you're saying?" Lucifer smirked a little, looking away from Mr. Sereph to hide it. Clearly he thought his boss had erred. "We see that you are using it to the extent of your abilities, but it could be better served. Let us pay you for it," and she stood up, the man cutting himself off abruptly as he glanced up at her. "I think we're done here. I have orders backing up in the kitchen, and I need to get back to work." His hand came out quick enough that she was worried he would hurt her, but in between his fingers was a business card. "In case you change your mind, the value of your talent is on the back. Just something to think about." Maggie wanted to walk away, but she found herself taking the card and putting it in her pocket. You should eat those while they're hot. Once they get cold, the taste is wasted." Then she turned and went back to the kitchen. They left some time later, returning nothing, but Maggie had put the enigmatic Mr. Sereph out of her mind for now. She had decided on her dish, and as she left for the night, she was already texting JD a list of things that she would need. If she was going to be ready, she was going to need everything to be perfect. And as it comes out of the oven, we see the magnificent fruits of our labor. The crown roast is perfectly crisp and ready to serve. She flashed a smile that was anything but pasted on this evening, and as she signed off, JD clapped in that slow, deliberate way of his. "If they don't accept you after that, then they are utter fools. Think I can get a taste of that crown roast? It was all I could do not to yank it out of the oven early." Maggie grabbed a knife, plating some of it so JD could try. It was a good recipe, easy to make, but worth a decent price at some upscale restaurants. Hopefully it would impress the judges enough to secure her a spot in the contestant pool. As she tried a little bit of it for herself, even she was impressed with how it had come out. You cook like this on the show?" JD said through a mouthful of meat. "And you're a shoo-in for the top spot." "I hope so," she said, thinking about what winning something like this could mean for her. She wondered suddenly if she should tell JD about Mr. Sereph. Would he be mad at the man for making such an offer? Would he call him up and tell him that he had her under contract? She didn't know, but she guessed that he wouldn't be very happy, and she didn't want to spoil the mood. "I know so," he said. "Your cooking is next level, Mags. I think you'll be hearing back from them once I send them this tape." "That's what you said about the cook-off last year, though," Maggie said, remembering her third-place trophy. "That was a total snatch job. I'm telling you, that lady had to have known someone. Your brisket chili was the best one there. I should know. I sampled all of them. Tasted like she was using plain ground beef with no style or substance. This is different. This is the chance you've been waiting for." Maggie nodded, putting her past failures out of her mind. This was going to be her moment. "Okay, let's take this home and polish it up a little. I want it to look amazing when I send it off." "Not too much," she hedged, knowing JD's habit for going overboard. "It's just a cooking video. It doesn't need too much polish." He waved a hand at her. "Don't worry, I'll get their attention. Mark my words, they won't be able to ignore this video." He left shortly after that, and Maggie hoped he was right. Maggie really wanted this to be her moment. JD sent the video off Saturday afternoon, and Maggie was a nervous wreck all of Sunday. She could be seen running the kitchen from the back of house, chain smoking by the back door as she glanced at her cell phone. They wouldn't render a decision this soon. It would probably be next week, and she just knew that she'd be on pins and needles the whole time. Monday came, and Monday went. Tuesday saw her regretting making the video in the first place. What business did she have making a video for something like this? She was no master chef. They would see that, and they would pass her over. No, JD had been right. This was her chance. She needed to stay positive. She was going to make it. She was going to be on the show. She was going to take her shot. As she sat drinking wine in her apartment after work, she looked at the business card that she had left on the coffee table. Libris Talent was printed across the front in bold black letters, with Richard T. Sereph printed below it. She had honestly forgotten it until she reached into her pocket for some change on Monday night. She left it on the table, not really wanting to touch it. She hadn't looked at the other side. She didn't want to know what the offer was. JD was doing okay by her, and she just needed to stay the course. By Wednesday, she was ready to chew nails and make staples. She was dreading Thursday as she got ready for bed on Wednesday. How was she going to cook for an audience with this hanging over her head? It was Summerfest tomorrow, and she'd be making mostly sides to go with her Hawaiian burgers. The sponsor was Sweet Hickory Barbecue Sauce, and she already knew that it would clash with the taste she was going for. Didn't matter, though. They had paid for the spot, so their sauce would be going into the marinade. She was brushing her teeth when someone knocked on her door, and she could see JD looking contrite as he stood on the front porch. She opened it slowly, curious to know what he was doing here so late. "Just figured I'd give you the news in person," he said, sounding a little disappointed. He was shuffling around like a cartoon character, and it would have been funny if the news didn't seem so dire. "Well, out with it, darling," she said, putting her hands on her hips. The mischievous smile that broke her lips told her all she needed to know as the clouds parted and his smile was once again radiant. "They loved your submission. They want you on set next Tuesday." Suddenly they were both dancing around like a couple of girls at a sleepover, and Maggie's fears and megrims had melted away. "You might want to tell Channel 12 that they need an alternate, because it sounds like you're going to be busy for the next few weeks." She realized he was right and decided to type up a little something to give the stage manager tomorrow when she got there. It was short notice, and they probably wouldn't like it, but she knew that they would support it. If she came back and picked up the segment again, it would do wonders for viewership. Even if she lost and was forced to return to her normal existence, people would watch to see the woman that had been on the chef showcase. She said goodnight to JD, thanking him for all his help, and when she turned in that night, she had a polite letter of intention typed up and let them know that she might need someone to take over her Thursday spot. She dreamed of winning it all that night as she drifted off, but as she cooked for the celebrity judges, there was the ever-present shadow of the smiling man in the black suit. He watched from the audience, his eyes boring into her, and in her dreams it made her clumsy. She dropped things, she spilled broth, she cut her finger with a knife as she chopped vegetables, and her happy dream became a nightmare. She woke up in a cold sweat, promising herself it wouldn't be like that. Next Tuesday would be her time to shine. She was all a-quiver as she stood beside the other 12 contestants for the first stage of Chef's Showcase. It was Thursday, and she just knew that Mary Schuyler, the girl who got to run the cooking segment when she was out, was bungling through the handmade crab rangoons they were making today. When she had announced it at the end of the last episode, the audience had actually stood up and applauded. There had been no grinning specters in that audience, and her contemporaries on the network had wished her well in the competition. Management hadn't been terribly happy with her, but she had agreed to wear the Channel 12's apron with something cooking emblazoned on it, and that soothed them a little bit. They had agreed to let her out of her contract for the length of the contest, but made it clear that they would expect her to fulfill her contractual obligations when she returned, no matter the outcome. Tuesday had been all about shooting promos at the backstory part of the show. She had talked about cooking with her mother and her grandmother when she was young, cooking her way through culinary arts school, losing her grandmother before graduation, and then getting on with Salome's and helping them succeed. It was a beautiful story, not as tear-jerking as some, but still pretty sympathetic. Now they all stood together, ready to be set to their tasks as the host, Conrad Beasley, introduced the panel of judges. All three were well-known chefs, but Maggie was more concerned with what the first dish would be. "Your first challenge, chefs, will be," and as he yanked the cloth back, Maggie let out a sigh of relief, "lamb. You'll have your choice of veggies from the garden box and 60 minutes on the clock. The theme for this dish will be backyard barbecue. And begin." Maggie scampered to get the ingredients along with the rest. Backyard barbecue, she thought, as she grabbed the greens and the tomatoes. Maybe a chutney or some lamb cut thick and served as steak. She was picking up onions when she thought about a burger, and the recipe came together in her mind. Before she knew it, she was grinding the meat into patties, cutting potatoes for fries, and getting everything ready for plating. The burgers cooked up quickly, the cheese melting and the onions caramelizing, and as the ingredients came together, Maggie found herself glancing up at the audience. She was terrified that she would see him there. She had seen him in her dreams for the past 4 nights, but that didn't mean that he would be there. He wasn't following her. She knew it was all nerves. She heard something pop in the pan and realized her medium-rare burgers were edging towards medium. She pulled them out and plated them, looking up to find that she had about 15 minutes left before the presentation. She put the fries in, plating the burgers before working on presentation. She added a toothpick, but took it out. She weighed the options between sesame buns and regular, and ultimately decided on seedless buns. The fries came out just as the clock hit 5 minutes, and Maggie had plenty of time to get them plated before time was called. She smiled at her food, standing at the ready as she watched the host. She was still watching the host when she saw something move in the gallery where the audience sat. It was a shadow, nothing too out there, but when it moved, it drew her eye. It was moving between the people, it seemed, the shadowy audience looking strange as they waited in hushed anticipation. They had called the first contestant, but she couldn't focus on whatever he was talking about. It was as if the whatever it was had been moving to get a better vantage point. It was as if it were moving to see her better, and as she stood sweating in her cook's whites, she could feel those familiar eyes on her. "Let's welcome our next chef, Margaret Schaefer, to the stage with her lamb burgers." Maggie felt her teeth chatter as she watched the shadow, not sure what it was, but knowing who it was. "Margaret!" She snapped back, nearly stumbling as she turned to the host. "Would you like to show us what you've made?" Maggie glanced back at the audience, but the shadow was gone. "Yes, it's my take on lamb chutney. It's a medium-rare lamb burger with oven fries and a..." But as she walked, she happened to look up. He was standing up now, grinning down at her with his too big grin, and she did trip this time. The trip was a good cover for her shriek, but the food was not so lucky. She caught 2 of the plates, the third going right into the lap of the middle judge, Chef Randolph McManus. He grimaced, looking at the mess in his lap, and suddenly her eyes were full of tears. Shit! She had messed it all up. This was it. There was no coming back from this. Not only that, but she only had 2 plates of food to offer now. She would fail the challenge, no matter what she said. Excuse me," she sobbed, running off stage before anyone could stop her. She was running all the way to the green room, but that didn't seem far enough. Before she knew it, she was in her car, crying into her steering wheel. She'd blown it. She couldn't go back to a TV spot either, because dollars to donuts, this would all go viral by tomorrow. Some stagehand or some audience member would have gotten the whole thing, and before she went to bed tonight, there would be memes and tweets that had been turned into clips on TikTok with the most unflattering music they could find. She wasn't even sure she could go back to the restaurant. Who would follow her after she had messed up so badly? She'd be a joke, a laughingstock, and if she did go back to her cooking show, it would be as a public spectacle. She reached into her pocket for tissues or napkins or something, but what she came out with was the business card of the man that she had been so afraid to see. She stared at it for a while, not sure she wanted to flip it over, but after a while she did, and her eyes went wide. She put it down, her hands shaking so badly she was afraid she might rip it. What was that number? For her talent, he had said, but what did it mean? Was it a job offer, a sign-on bonus, or something else? She looked at the front of the card. She wouldn't know unless she called. The number came slowly as her shaking fingers pressed the buttons, and it rang twice before someone picked up. "Libra's Talent, Lucifer Jones speaking." She was silent, not sure how to begin, but apparently they had been waiting for her. "Miss Schaefer, is that you?" She jumped, startled that they remembered her. Yes, she finally said. "Have you called to make arrangements for your talent?" "I have," she said, before she could think better of it. "Stupendous! Mr. Sereph is making arrangements to meet you at your home for a demonstration this evening. We are very interested in acquiring your talent for our growing roster. Will tonight work for you?" Her teeth were chattering. Maggie didn't want that old ghoul anywhere near her house, but she knew that if she hoped to get the sum on the back of the card, she would need to show him what she could do. That kind of money could help her put some distance from this town. From people she knew who wouldn't let her forget her slip-up. The laughter wasn't what scared her, not really. What she couldn't stand would be the looks of disappointment. JD would be disappointed. So would the staff at Salome's, and she couldn't stand for that. She would want to leave, to go somewhere where they couldn't find her, and the money would help her with that. "Yes, tell him I'll see him tonight. My address is..." We know all about you, Miss Maggie. We'll be there, 7 p.m. sharp, so make sure you're at home." He hung up on her then, leaving her sitting there with the phone against her ear, and a deep sense of dread running up and down her veins. What exactly had she agreed to? She didn't know, but she supposed she would find out. When her phone rang at 6:45, Maggie jumped a mile. She had been drinking wine in her living room, trying to get in the right headspace for what was to come. She had been right. Someone had leaked her little mishap today, and it was trending online pretty hard. She had seen it on TikTok, on Facebook, and had been sent a couple of them by JD earlier in the evening. Her slip had been set to Benny Hill music, Thriller, some song by Blood on the Dance Floor, and a slew of other things. The comment section had been brutal, and Maggie was in a state. She'd been trying to put it out of her mind so she could get ready for tonight, but when the phone rang, she was afraid it would be her mother or one of her cousins who wanted to laugh at what a klutz she was. It wasn't, though. It was JD. "Mags, why didn't you call me? This is great. We can totally..." "I messed up, JD. I didn't want to talk to anyone after that. I dropped food all over McManus. McManus! I'm surprised he didn't cuss me right then and there. Maggie, you're looking at this all wrong. You're a viral sensation. We can spin this." I don't see how. I'm off the show. I can't go back to Channel 12 as a laughingstock. I may not even be able to..." "Who said you were off the show?" She stopped for a moment, JD's words washing over her. "What?" "Roger got kicked off this episode. He made this awful stink about not using animals in his cooking and made a hummus instead. He got disqualified on the spot. And once the judges tried your burger, there was no chance you weren't going on to the next round." Maggie stood up, careful to set the wine glass down so she didn't drop it. Maybe there was a chance to salvage this. She was going on to the next round. There was still a chance to make something of this. She could still win. She could take home the prize, and all anyone would talk about in the end was the meme. Someone knocked on her door, and Maggie realized it was 7 o'clock. "I gotta go, JD," she said, hanging up on him as he tried to squeeze out a few more ideas. She went to the door, and there he was, smiling at her as he stood on the stoop. He still looked like an undertaker, and she still found herself afraid of him. But as he came in to sit at her table, she found that she could tolerate him for a little while. "It seems that fate is trying to draw you to me. I keep seeing you everywhere, and I'm tired of it." He just smiled his enigmatic smile and took a book from his coat. It was huge, like the family Bible her parents had owned, but it was anything but holy. The outside was thick and cracked, the leather ancient but still soft as calfskin. It looked like it might bite if you put your hand too close, and he opened it to reveal a list of names within. He took a silver pen from the inside of his coat and handed it to her with a little flourish. She looked at the pen dubiously, not sure what he wanted. "Do I sign that? Is that some sort of contract?" "More of a pact. Sign your name and receive your compensation. It really is that simple." Maggie took the pen with trembling hands, setting it to the page as she prepared to sign. She was still a little hesitant to get anywhere near that book, but as she signed her name and laid the pen inside, she looked up expectantly. "Okay, now what?" He pulled out another book. She found to her surprise it was a cookbook. "Open it, and let's begin." She chuckled a little, realizing her name was on the book. "I don't see what this has to do with..." But as the book came open, Maggie felt her breath leave her. It was like phantom fingers rummaging through her mind. They were using her like a Rolodex, taking what they wanted and leaving her mind empty and violated. She could see the empty cookbook filling up, and as it snapped shut, another took its place. Maggie felt those phantom fingers taking everything, lifting her most cherished parts, but she was powerless to do anything but stand there and let it happen. As the third book took its place, that's when she noticed her hands. Her hands had begun to prune, like someone who'd spent too much time in the bath. As the fourth book appeared, she found that she couldn't even feel it. When the fifth book took its place, she was growing weak. She filled up 10 in all, and Mr. Sereph seemed well pleased when she finally blacked out. "Worth the price, as I'd known it would be." That's where JD found her the next day, lying on the floor of her living room, her hands shriveled and useless. When she hadn't arrived to shoot that morning, he had gone straight to her apartment to make sure that she hadn't done something drastic. She was so upset after the day before that I was worried she might have done something stupid. Now I don't know what to think. The hospital didn't have a clue either. Her hands bore signs of nerve damage, and she was completely unable to hold anything heavier than a pencil for the rest of her life. What was worse, she couldn't remember anything about cooking. JD worried that she might have hit her head or something, but Maggie knew what it had been. Mr. Sereph had taken all that away and paid her handsomely for it. No one ever questioned how she had become a millionaire overnight, but the money helped ease some of the sting. She was careful with it, careful not to live outside her means, but it never became an issue. JD helped some. After the social media circus around her fall, the actual media circus around her story was big news. JD helped set up interviews, got her news spots, and even got her a spot on several talk shows. Maggie was a small celebrity, but she was always careful not to mention Mr. Sereph. She had some vague idea that no one would take her seriously, and the people who would could be dangerous. She told them it was some kind of sudden spontaneous nerve deterioration, something the doctors had floated, and they seemed to like that idea. A year later, Maggie was sitting in New York at one of those fancy restaurants McManus owned when he came out to her table to say hello. She was a little starstruck when he came swaggering over, the tall and muscled chef that everyone seemed to live in fear of, and when he smiled from under that thick mustache, it put her at ease. "Think nothing of it, darling. I knew I had to come say hello when they told me you were here. What brings you to New York?" "I've got an appointment at some clinic, some new procedure that they think will give me some mobility again. It won't, but some kind of benefactor is paying for it after hearing my story, so I could hardly decline." He laughed. He had a good laugh. "Well, you must let me make you something. It's the least I can do. You made me something the last time we met." It was Maggie's turn to laugh. "Yeah, a mess. I'm so sorry. That was unintentional," she started, but he waved it off. "Think nothing of it, darling. I tried it after you ran off. Bloody tasty. Let me make you something to return the favor." She thanked him, and 30 minutes later, he was bringing her a plate of meatloaf with carrots, peas, mashed potatoes. Maggie raised an eyebrow at it. It was a little simple for a place with 4 Michelin stars, but she couldn't complain. Maggie hadn't even been able to cook eggs after that night, and the woman she had hired to cook for her usually just made fancy dishes. This reminded her of home. Her hand shook a little as she lifted the fork, but her hands always shook these days. As she put the first bite in her mouth, she tasted something she hadn't in a very long time. This wasn't just any meatloaf. This was her grandmother's meatloaf. Baba had taught her to make it before she died, swearing her to secrecy on the exact recipe. At least she had, before Mr. Sereph had taken it from her. "Glad you like it," McManus said. "But then again, that burger wasn't the only thing you made me, was it?" She watched him return to his kitchen, wanting to be mad, but only finding tears. She cried into her meatloaf as she ate, knowing it would be the last taste of Grandma's meatloaf she ever had. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.